Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We have an international audience today. We do have a few registrants that are still coming on board here at just 1 minute after the hour. So I'm going to give it just about another 20, 30 seconds or so before we get kicked off. So stand by. Thank you. Okay, looks like the logins are starting to slow down just a little bit, so we will go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Sumter Cox, and I will be your moderator today. Thank you for joining us. We actually have a really nice size audience today, and looks like it's representing a broad range of industries and different functional roles, so that's great to see. That's perfect, and that's what this webinar today is all about. So before I cover the housekeeping items, I think I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the current environment that we're working in today. But to keep those comments short, I'll just say thanks for taking the time during this less than ideal circumstances. During these less than ideal circumstances, I hope that everyone is well and safe and doing everything they can to stay that way. So with that, just a few quick housekeeping items before we really get underway. First, we are in listen-only mode. As I mentioned, we do have a good size audience this morning. However, we will be taking questions. You may ask them at any time using the questions and chat feature on your attendee panel. So the little red arrow over here to the right, just feel free to open that up and send that to the presenters and organizers. We will do our best to answer any of those as we go directly from Ivy Babcock, who is on with us today as a co-organizer. So thank you, Ivy. If Ivy's not able to address and answer your question directly as we go, we will be taking all of those and logging the questions, and we have some time set aside at the very end to address as many of those questions as possible. We will be sending you a recording of this webinar today, so for future reference or sharing with other colleagues that weren't able to attend. And finally, we do ask that you take a very brief exit survey at the conclusion of today's event. That'll be presented once we close the webinar and also with a follow-up email. So we would really appreciate your input and feedback on that. We'll just take a minute. So with that, I would like to introduce our host for today, Morgan Van Buren and John Sheehan. Morgan and John are true pioneers in the industry. They have more than 30 years of combined experience. They've truly been in the digital signage game since its infancy. So, you know, today you're actually getting a real double whammy of valuable expertise with Morgan, whose expertise is kind of on the back end of things of digital signage, more on the technical side in hardware and software, and John, who is on the front lines of working with clients every day and focused on the operational and the creative side and implementation side. Both of them cross over into each other's worlds very well, so you are in very good hands today, and I think that you will certainly benefit from the breadth of their experience. Today, Morgan and John will focus on the unique challenges that enterprise companies must meet when developing a successful digital signage strategy. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Morgan to review our agenda and get us started. Morgan.
Thank you, Sumter, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So if we're on the agenda slide just real quickly, today's webinar is all about sort of our digital signage solutions and how to prepare and execute for a digital signage strategy. So it felt natural. We'll start from the top. We'll review what digital signage is, what kind of how we define it. We'll look at some of the more common applications, and even at a high level, without getting too technical, how it works. Then we'll take a moment to look at the different parts that make up a project, as well as sort of the general market trends that we've been seeing over the last few years and what the projections are for the future. And then finally, after this introduction, we'll see what commonly happens to companies as they get ready to kick off their DS project, and something that we call paralysis and pitfalls. We'll go over those, see what companies feel, and then we'll look at the framework that we call the 7 essentials, sort of a checklist, if you will, that we recommend everyone follows to successfully implement on their digital signage strategy. So if we go to the definition of digital signage, what is digital signage? Well, to define digital signage in sort of its simplest terms, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's signage displayed on a digital display. You may sometimes hear of it, refer to it as electronic signage, but it's the same general idea. In place of a traditional print sign for advertisement, menus, posters, or even just indication of wayfinding, this is digital content. So think of digital content as images, videos. More recently, we're seeing web pages, even AR and VR content that make up the signage. And that is displayed on a digital display. And a digital display can really be a lot of variety of different technical tools, such as more commonly an LCD screen, which can be anything ranging from a small few inches screen all the way to something around 100 inches. LED screens, like you see on this picture of Times Square, which are big outdoor screens, but also projection mapping, and some niche technology like holographic screens, or even more recently, we've seen things in the e-paper world, like your Kindle ebook. And so essentially that's what this setup is mostly made out of, right? You've got a digital sign and a media player there that helps play with that. So John, some of the applications we've seen, I think we've seen it in a lot of places.
Sure, and thank you, Morgan, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. This is John Sheehan. Yeah, like as Morgan said, really unlike traditional forms of in-store media, digital signage delivers incredible flexibility, and it has the potential to really have a powerful impact on your business. And I think until about 2 years ago, the most common applications you may have encountered are things like menu boards in QSR, large video walls, or large visual installations in flagships and large malls, or maybe individual promotional screens that are placed strategically around your store or your business and along your customer journey. And today, as retailers try to engage customers more in the shopping experience, there's been a huge growth that we've seen in the use of touchscreen technology. Why? Because as customers, we all expect an immersive shopping experience now. And with touchscreen, you can now customize it right down to meet individual needs. And I suppose, again, as Sumter mentioned at the outset, you know, the current climate we're living in, never before has the flexibility of digital versus traditional media being so obvious. Like with the COVID situation in recent weeks, we've seen advertising screens in malls across Europe that have stopped all promotional messaging and replaced it with public health and safety messaging. You know, essential retail businesses that are still open are choosing to use some of their screens or screen time to reinforce those safety messages, inform customers on things like product inventory or wayfinding, as many places have reorganized their stores to meet this unusual demand. And finally, retailers that have screened specifically for employee areas have been able to increase the use of those screens dramatically to keep employees informed and updated, and the speed at which retailers can update their messaging as situation changes is really kind of unmatched by any other traditional media. So I think irrespective of the signage application, they're really all made up of the same core elements. Content management software, media players, and screens. And while that might seem pretty straightforward, it does involve many parts of an organization that we'll touch on later. And all these parts need to really work in harmony to deliver really a successful digital signage deployment.
Yeah, and I think, John, if I can add to that, essentially, you're right. There's a lot of various implementations or applications of digital signage, but when it comes down to how it actually works, it's ironically remarkably consistent and fairly quite simple. There's really three parts to this. There's what we tend to call the content management system, the CMS, which sort of drives the logic. You have a media player somewhere in the store, or more than one per store, and then a display, a sign that the media player is connected to. And obviously there's dozens, maybe even hundreds of possible variations of those three things. But essentially you're always going to find those three elements. Let me give you an example. So more modern commercial grade screens today that we call smart screens have built-in media players. And so while if you look at it from a high level, you may not see the media player in that setup, that media player just happens to be in the screen, but that piece, that element of the setup is in there and will always be there. Same way, of course, you need a screen, and the content management is no different, right? We represented it here as a little cloud because the vast majority of the implementation, especially enterprise grade ones, tend to have a content management hosted either in the cloud or on a network somewhere. But we still see sometimes, specifically for more smaller implementations, on-prem content management systems, and even what we refer to as sneakernet technology, where you kind of manually move the content around to the media player using a USB drive or a DVD drive. So those are always going to be your three components. Regardless of the technology that you end up using, there's going to be a content management system, a media player, and a display at some point. And quite frankly, while we could probably spend the entire webinar talking about sort of the technical aspects of this, I think what we want to focus on today is what we strongly believe is the most important part of the digital signage strategy, right? Which is that content strategy and the visual 360.
Yeah, exactly. And like with any digital signage application deployments, there's many components that you're going to have to consider. So what we found is that the common starting point should always be your content strategy. So think about what is the purpose of the screen? How's it going to engage or impact the customer journey? And ultimately, how will it influence your customers' behaviors? And it's only after you've identified and agreed what that is between all of the departments that will be involved that you should start looking at things like the technology to deliver it, the screen type, finding the right content management software platform, installation and ongoing maintenance and so on. It's not that these components are less important. In fact, they're all vitally important. It's just that they need to follow your core objective of the digital solution itself. And sometimes that can be tough, as the ownership of finding the right digital signage may fall on very different departments. Maybe it's considered an IT project because it involves media players, software, and network connectivity. Maybe it's your store ops team, as screens have to be installed somewhere within your store's real estate. Or it could be the marketing department that's mainly focusing on content development for the screens. Really, whomever the responsibility falls to, consider the impact that digital signage will have on all parts of your business. And we find that if you start with your content strategy and core objectives on the screen, we find that's the most successful approach.
Thank you. So let me sort of recap this intro. This was the first part of the webinar. We didn't want to spend too much time on it. Hopefully we didn't go too fast. But just to wrap up sort of the intro to digital signage, we'll start looking back and kind of look ahead at what the future looks like. So we feel that what I would refer to as modern digital signage started in the 2000s, early 2000s, essentially as the internet infrastructure was becoming more broadly accessible and as screens were getting flatter. And plasma screens made their way, and then LCD screens made their way into stores, and they were way more convenient than the previous generation of displays. And so that's where it all kicked off. What we're seeing in general, broad strokes, is that digital signage trends over the last 20 years have started out in the East, in Asia, made their way west through Europe, all the way to the Americas over typically a 5 to 10 year lag. It's not, an exact number, but it's the general trend that we see in terms of adoption for these types of technology and solutions. Here in North America, another thing that we've seen from different studies is that the adoption is more rapid in the SMB market. I think we typically associate that with businesses that are more nimble than enterprise, that have fewer people involved in the decision-making process, and quite simply, where the logistics of a rollout aren't as daunting and are fairly straightforward. So we're seeing that in then adoption a little bit later into the enterprise world. Now, while quite many businesses today have already adopted a digital signage strategy, a recent study that was conducted in 2019 has shown that the expectation is that that market will grow by another 50% in the next 4 years. So there's a ton of room to grow. And that is most of the time associated with the barrier of entry being lowered over the last few years. It really is lower than it ever has been. The cost of the hardware, the cost of the screens is significantly lower than it used to be. And then the network infrastructure is better and more robust. And finally, one other thing to keep in mind, the content, the digital content we talked about earlier, the pictures, the websites, the interactive content, all that there's just more of it now than there ever has been. So we see and we hear a lot of excitement, a lot of angst in the enterprise market about sort of executing on the digital signage strategy. And clearly our enterprise partners, I think everyone sees the value. There's demand, and it becomes at the enterprise level fairly quickly more complex, and it leads our partners into what we call the state of paralysis and pitfalls, which is the next part of the webinar.
Great, thanks, Morgan. With that growth, we were just curious to kind of check in with our audience today. We wanted to conduct a quick poll, and simple yes, no question that should be popping up on your screen. The poll is now open, and the question simply is, are you currently using digital signage in some way, shape, or form today? So we'll leave this up for just a few seconds as the votes are coming in. Thank you. Looks like we got a couple more yet to vote. Wow, okay. There we go. Okay, so just so you know, we do have, looks like about 85% of you are actually using digital signage in some way, shape, or form today. So that's great. I'm sure that a lot of you are just getting started. And for those of you that aren't deploying it yet, there are lots in here for you as well. So very good. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Morgan to talk about the paralysis and pitfalls that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Sumter. And it sounds so a lot of you already have some experience with digital signage, which is great. It makes my next point a little bit easier. I think quite frankly, we will all agree that digital signage is really a terrific tool, and it can accomplish a wide variety of different things. And what we've seen from our experience with our customers is that it's a really sticky tool. We don't have a lot of people, if any, that ever kind of went back. You start with that tool and you adopt it, and it really is very sticky. So there are very many reasons to be excited and tempted to just kind of jump in, right? Marketers will see incredible value and potential. The speed, John referred to that specifically in the context of COVID-19, and the speed and flexibility and sort of updating content and reaching an audience is unparalleled. Operations will get excited with the sort of the improvements that you can get there as well. Finance and the executive team will see some ROIs and cost reductions availability. So there's just overall across the entire range, everyone can get excited behind a DS project. But that enthusiasm, that momentum can quickly lead to paralysis or even pitfalls. And they're almost separate situation states that we find our partners in. So paralysis is one of the, it's kind of overthinking it, right? Is you start with this idea of, okay, I want to do digital signage, and then how do I go forward with it? And it's true, it is an interesting, complex project that involves a variety of different questions and people and parts that have to come together nicely. So what is the goal, right? Do I want to educate people, inform? Do I want to promote or sell? Do I want to just have a wow factor? Things along those lines is sort of a first question that people may not all agree on what the goal is, and you have to sort of align on that thing, right? So how do we define success? What are our KPIs? Who do we have to get involved? Where do we start? What hardware? What software? Et cetera, et cetera. And that can get you into this sort of paralysis state where all of a sudden it's hard to move forward because you just don't know how to start, how to kick this off. On the flip side of that, you have the pitfalls, which sometimes some companies go from paralysis to pitfalls or just straight to pitfalls, which is, doesn't matter, let's put a screen up on the wall, see what happens. And it's about maybe going a little too fast, having too loose of a content strategy up front, and not doing necessarily all the homework up front to make sure that you're set up for success, right? And that's the pitfall of just saying, it's gonna be easy, we're gonna get through this, everyone else has, let's just go, 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 and then not necessarily getting the best value out of your project. So those are the situations we find a lot of our partners in. And while we have this sort of framework that we call the 7 essentials, sort of a checklist, if you will, and we're going to go over step by step.
Great, thanks, Morgan. So here's just a quick preview of the 7 essentials. And as Morgan just mentioned, and as John has mentioned, and I think everybody's starting to realize, we are going to hammer home the importance of establishing a content strategy, and that's the first essential that we're going to talk through. So before we get into content strategy in a little bit more depth and the other 6 components that we want to talk about, one last quick poll, if you don't mind, just to get a sense of where everybody is in their thinking around their content strategy. So this should be coming up right about now. How do you envision using digital signage? You may answer more than one. We run into a lot of clients that have a hybrid solution where they're not only looking to promote and sell, but as John and Morgan mentioned, we're seeing a great increase of companies that are looking to train and communicate internally. It's a very effective platform for that. Repurposing screens for internal audience, and then during the day, when shoppers or guests or diners or whoever's in-house, switching over to external. So, wow. Great, I'm going to share these results here. I'm sorry, I forgot to share the results the last time, but as you can see here, we're seeing a broad mix of applications. 70% entertain, lots are informing and educating, promoting and selling. Aesthetics, that's video walls and that sort of thing. That's really cool. We see a lot more of that too. And training and communicating internally, coming in at 46%. So good balance. Great to see. All right, John, let's dive into that all-important subject of content strategy.
Thanks, Hunter. Yeah, so as I've said, and you'll probably hear me say it a lot, content strategy really is everything, and it is your starting point. And hopefully the poll, like seeing those results, helps you understand, like, having a different content strategy or objectives is perfectly normal, and each business, or even each down to the individual screen, should have its own strategy. So much like your broader content marketing strategy on web or mobile platforms, the common goal of presenting the right content to the right audience at the right time. So think of your digital signage as visual real estate, and you need to really concentrate on maximizing that visual real estate. So the first thing we do is, the starting point is really to define your objectives, and they'll be different for many industries. So what are you trying to accomplish with the signage? Is it to inform, engage, sell, entertain, or brand enhancement? Depending on your business, your goals could be any one of these or a combination of all of them. Next thing we do is then try to define the audience. So who is going to be looking at the signage, or better yet, who do you want to look at it? Once you know and you think about traffic patterns, and you can consider day parts during the day, how your customer demographic may change by time of day or day of the week. So how do things change, or how could signage actually help change the current audience patterns and engagement to help solve your problems? Then the next thing to do is to look at creating content calendars and schedules. So bit of a fun part here for some people. You can try to put on the hat of a TV producer, but really think about, what is the content? How often will it change? Where is it going to come from? Do you already have some for produced? Do you have agencies that can help, or do you need to develop some content? For promotional screens, for example, how will they tie into your current marketing and promotional calendar? Because it's digital, obviously, it can really easily be changed at very low cost. So what else might you use the screens for? So the best advice there is really to start broad from a seasonal standpoint that's consistent with your general marketing and content calendars, and then fine tune it as you move forward to monthly or weekly or daily scheduling. And that also raises an important consideration of content management, specifically who is going to do it. Often clients already have people in place or resources in place that it can fit fairly easily into their workflow, but sometimes that's not the case. And for larger footprints where you're really looking to leverage localization, the complexities or just the sheer volume of content that you need to manage, it can be taxing, and you may want to consider a partner that you can outsource this task to. The next area of consideration in content strategy is the screen size and the placement. And we'll touch on screens a little bit more when we talk about hardware, but really as it relates specifically to content, the strategy can actually dictate what screens you'll need to buy and where you need to place them. Sometimes where you want to place them presents its own set of challenges, which may dictate your content strategy needs to slightly shift. So consider things like how far your customer will be from the screen. So how far is the viewer from the content, and adapt your content to meet those considerations. Next thing you want to do is create and gather content. We always try to not reinvent the wheel, use the content you already have in place that was made for different media, but tweak it slightly to be more suitable for this in-store environment. So, you know, don't just take a TV commercial and expect that it'll have the same impact in store, maybe tweak it slightly. So consider where you're going to get the content from, what you can use that you have already, and what may need to be tweaked. Other best practices, really, it's, you know, Morgan mentioned it's easy to get really excited and somewhat overzealous when you start to think about how you can utilize this. And we've seen a few clients overreach at the outset, and some have failed on their content strategy. So the best advice, you know, particularly when you're planning ahead, is more content's not always better. Start small, measure, analyze, test it, and you can easily change it. That is the real beauty of digital signage. Unlike other forms of media, you can change your strategy as you build this out and discover the results of what you're doing. So the key takeaway really is that content is king. It's an industry cliche, but it's still true. Zero in on your content strategy per screen or zone, and give each screen its own purpose.
Yeah, and let me say this, John, for what it's worth, as the person that usually has a technical hat on, as we kind of implement digital signage strategies for our customers, I do want to point out before I get into any of the technical aspects of the 7 essentials, is that I completely agree with that. I think I am a huge sponsor of content strategy being first and really starting your project there. So with that, I'll put my technical hat back on and dive through the next 3 of the essentials, which are all sort of the technical aspects of the DS project. And we're gonna start with software, all right? And software, we've referred to it in the past. You'll hear it called the content management system. I like to think of it almost like the control tower that's responsible for really trafficking your content, hosting and trafficking your content, and making sure things go right. And it's a vital piece of your project. And so picking the right one is absolutely critical. So how do you go about doing that, right? What do you have to consider, and what's the process? Well, first, you're gonna wanna do some homework, find out who's available in the industry. And let me save you guys some time. Every single CMS is the best out there. As you kind of go through those meetings, I can assure you everyone will tell you that their CMS is the best. I can also tell you it's probably not the best for everybody. And I think that's the key thing here, right? There are a lot of great tools out on the market, a lot of great CMSs out in the market. And I think it matters most what you're trying to do. So once you've done your content strategy and you understand what is essential to you, such as the amount of content, the variety of content from store to store, the number of maybe content contributors, the number of users, if you will, if you need approval workflows built into your process, the reporting you'll need, all those things come into play. So what you want to do there is you want to first start by understanding where the CMS, the vendor, the partner comes from, what's their area of expertise. And we sort of think there's 3 big ones. There's probably more, but the 3 big ones are going to be either enterprise, small businesses, or ad campaigns. So if you have a CMS vendor that has a strong background in sort of the enterprise world, you'll find that more likely they'll be really good at managing large fleets of devices. They have tools that make complex operations a lot easier and less repetitive, right? And they'll have workflows, they'll have different user profiles and user tiers, but they'll also probably have to sacrifice a little bit of ease of use in order to do that. The other sort of side of the spectrum, you're going to have CMSs that cater perfectly for your local business, your small mom and pop, and what you're going to find there is a streamlined interface, very easy to use, that may lack some features, and as you kind of grow, some of the tasks that are really driven to do, one-on-one for one screen, as you have to do it across multiple screens, may become repetitive, and so may not scale as well. And then finally, the third one that I mentioned was sort of the ad campaign tools. Excuse me. So those are tools that are really great and geared towards managing an ad campaign. So they have terrific reporting tools, terrific automation, but on the flip side, they may make very basic things a little unnecessarily complex. So at the end of the day, I think the key takeaway here for software is do your homework, understand where people come from, and then ask for demos and really apply those demos to your scenarios, the ones you've defined in your content strategy previously. After software, the other technical component is the hardware. And we're really going to focus in, again, we could spend hours just talking about the hardware, but we'll focus in for today on sort of highlights around the two big pieces, which are the displays and the media player. So the displays, they come in all shapes and sizes and various technologies. You're going to first want to determine sort of where the displays are going to live and how big they need to be and how far away your audience is going to be. That's part of your content strategy up front. You want to make sure you define those things, and then that'll split it up into different types of options. If you're in really, really big or really outdoor, sort of a Times Square type of thing, you're going to go LED, and then the real factor is going to be how bright and what's your pitch, meaning how close your pixels are together, and that'll be determined by what the content is, if it's static or if it's motion, and how far away your users are. If you're in the what I would call the traditional range between, I would call it a 20-inch screen to an 80-inch or 100-inch screen, you're probably going to be looking at a traditional screen. And in this case, the big thing to keep in mind is and those are these LCD TVs, right? What I want to point out there that's really important is it's tempting to go to your local big box store and buy a TV, and it's not necessarily a good idea. It's actually probably not a great idea. The displays you're going to use in your stores are obviously going to be turned on a lot more than your average TV at home. And you're going to be maybe even putting them in some grilling situations over a frying pan or in a very hot environment with direct sunlight in front. Or you may have some people coming up and touching them 20 times a minute, right, for touchscreens. So you just want to think through that, all of those aspects of it, and just make sure you stick to what we call commercial screens, which are commercial grade screens. You're not going to see them, in your Best Buy, your Costco, or your Target, but your vendors will help you with that and make sure you pick the right screens for the job. The media players, you may or may not have a choice, depending on your content management system and the ones and what you've picked there. You may have to go with a media player and not have much choice. But if you do, same sort of recommendation with the screen. Go with a commercial grade screen. This is not your run-of-the-mill Windows 7, PC anymore, like it used to be decades ago. You want to go with a purpose-built set-top box that has security built in and all the features it needs to run for the next 5 to 10 years without ever needing any human intervention. And then finally, just ancillaries. Those are too broad to cover in just one webinar, but you may have other pieces of hardware that are part of your project. They could be sensors, they could be what we call snappers if you lift something to trigger content. It could be cameras, all of those things. Again, what we urge people to do in this case is think through this through the commercial channel, not the consumer channel. Your average Logitech webcam is not going to survive very long. So your key takeaway for all of your hardware is apply it to your content strategy, and then go commercial grade and make sure you think about something that's scalable. And then finally, the fourth and last sort of technical point on our 7 essentials is IT and security. We've lumped them together. They're not technically exactly the same thing, but they tend to go hand in hand, at least in the conversations The project from an IT perspective, so that's really your network. If you think about it that way, it's hosting your servers, and it's making sure that there's enough bandwidth and that the devices are online. So what happens way too often is that you're just involved with maybe marketing or some stakeholder in the project. You're thinking through the goals, you're thinking through your KPIs, and you're really excited about rolling this out. You might want to do a pilot, and then all of a sudden you're getting IT involved for the first time, and they realize that you don't have enough place on the network, or that there's no room for this, or they have to do a security scan before that, and your timeline falls apart. Possibly even some of your costs get shuffled. So you want to make sure you involve them early. Make sure they're part of the conversation, that they understand what's going to happen, and that they vet all of that. And from a security perspective, again, sort of goes hand in hand, but also a little different. This is today, in today's day and age, it's impossible not to take security seriously. It's not a very sexy topic, but it is absolutely crucial to all of our clients and everyone in the industry. And so this may help you choose your CMS up front. You also want to get your security team involved in vetting the devices that will end up on the network, or all of that traffic that's going to go between your digital sign ultimately and the content management system. So make sure you involve them early as well, and have them weigh in the choice of your partner, the choice of your CMS, and the choice of your hardware. So that would be our key takeaway for number 4, which would be involve your IT and security teams early in the process, so that you make sure you build that into your project plan.
Thanks, Morgan. And speaking of project plans, that leads us into project management. So really, before any installation process begins, you need to adopt an approach of strategic and detailed planning. And this will require coordination, as we've seen, between several different departments and people. So decide really who needs to be involved in the project management team and what responsibilities each person will oversee. It's often quite advantageous to create a basic responsibility, accountable, consulted, and informed matrix that considers the appropriate department heads for marketing, IT, creative ops, and procurement, along with any others as appropriate. Also look for a partner that has corresponding resources on their side that can interact in the same language as each of your own departments that will be involved. Then when it comes to looking at things like installation technicians, make sure that who you choose is established and experienced in the digital signage industry. Quite often, they may outsource to some subcos, and if that's the case, you need to make sure that the subco network is properly vetted and proven in the industry. You want to get people that know what they're doing at the site level, that can do things quickly but not rushed, that understand the challenges you'll have from a store ops perspective if installations are going on during the day. So go with a company that has a proven track record in that. So really, on the project management side, the key takeaway is to pilot test at a handful of locations first. Put all of your plans that you've done into place, put it through its paces, identify and resolve any potential roadblocks that may have cropped up that you weren't aware of when you were planning. Document those in the process, change your process, and move forward. Then looking at costs, from a cost perspective, again, there's many elements that will impact the cost. What you really want to be looking for is the total cost of ownership of the entire project. And don't just look at the short term, like the high capex expense up front to get screens installed. Look at a 3 to 5 year plan. Screens have a very long life. So this project and the cost of the project also consider the long life that this will be in place. And the primary costs are, of course, screens. They'll be your largest upfront cost, and there are many variables that will determine the cost of screens. So the size, the brand, whether it has to be high brightness screen because it's in or close to a window. So really consider the screens and what each screen is going to be used for, and that will dictate the type of screen, the cost that you choose. Media players, as Morgan has mentioned, there are lots of media players out there. Costs have decreased over the years in response to greater demand. Providers may sell the device outright to you, or others may offer a lease option. Most devices are not software agnostic, so leasing is typically preferred, though some businesses may opt to purchase upfront. The next element is software, and most often digital signage software is licensed per device. It's typically a flat cost component for the duration and the total lifespan of the project, and something that obviously has to be factored in, maybe on a monthly fee per device. There's lots of options out there. Installation, that can vary. You may only want installations to be done at nighttime when stores are closed. It may be more than a single person job. If screens are over 55 inch, by legally and from insurance purposes, you need multiple technicians. So consider installation factors. Things that will affect our installation cost also are the timeline of the rollout. How quick can you make this happen so people can plan to really contract those timelines. Content creation and management. The cost for content creation will depend on what you already have on hand, the internal resources you have to modify it, or if you need to outsource, you need to bear that cost in mind also. Training from upfront perspective, training your own teams in how to use the CMS platform, how to broadcast and manage content. So most companies will provide a level of training for you, but also remember that staff and your team members may change. So build in a little bit of ongoing training into how to use the CMS platform that you choose. And finally, service and support. Really, the cost doesn't just stop, as I've said, once everything is installed, but post rollout service and support really can't be assumed or ignored. The digital signage industry, as we know, is fragmented with numerous startups and providers who specialize in one or two critical aspects of the solution. When supporting larger enterprises, make sure that their responsive and reliable support structures are already in place. Some clients will look to maybe split up the overall project into multiple vendors between software providers, screen providers, and installation companies. And while that may work for some, you really ultimately need to think about the additional processes that will come from that. There'll be more administration, there'll be invariably more confusion and margins of errors where finger pointing tends to happen. So really the key takeaway on cost is measure your total cost of ownership. Your screens, as I say, have a very long lifespan. So take time to bring in everybody early, consider the total impact on your business, and build, any RFP requirements from there. And the last of the 7 that we're going to touch on now is ROI. And really within the industry, that's considered the holy grail. And in your efforts to determine that return on investment, it's really important to remember that digital signage isn't a short-term proposition. Like any digital campaign, it will require continued analysis, iteration, and some degree of faith in attribution. Unlike other digital campaigns, drawing direct lines to desired goals and conversions with digital signage can be a little more complex, but there's several ways you can look at it and build it into the planning stages. Set benchmarks up front. So what are sales today and what are your current customer survey results? Setting early benchmarks around 1 or 2 metrics can really demonstrate the value of digital signage and ultimately improvements upon KPIs. Use available data that you already have. Technology to provide content playback reports can be easy and simple to execute. Common data points provided from most content management systems include content frequency, the number of times played, or the duration of the content, the total time played. So build that into your ROI. Plan some A/B testing, and this is where you will probably see the best results of the impact of it. Apply A/B testing strategies from other campaigns. Really what we found is when you do some A/B testing, possibly during the pilot phase, we've seen in the grocery sector here in the US an uplift of 10%. And in the financial sector in Europe, we saw an uplift of 40% on inquiries into an advertised insurance product they were selling. So it can have some very, very powerful results, but run some A/B testing to really demonstrate the power of it. Survey your customers. You know, exit surveys, did they see digital signage? Can they recall any content? And adjust your strategies based on the feedback and the answers you get from that. So lots and lots of ways to incorporate and consider your ROI. The key takeaway is that sometimes it's really all about the experience. It may not be just a hard dollar figure that is easy to prove. It can be more about the return on the experience or the return on your overall objectives.
Thank you. So thank you, John. So essentially, I mean, that was a fairly quick overview of our 7 essentials framework. There's, as I think we kind of scratched the surface, you probably picked up on the fact that there's a ton of detail in each one of those 7 points, and all of them are important. Right now, obviously, we're not going to be able to get into all that level of detail. But first off, let me remind everyone that there is an opportunity to ask questions on the chat. So if you want to ask a question, please don't be shy. We've got a few minutes at the end of this webinar for Q&A. We'd love to take your questions. If it goes beyond, feel free to reach out to John or to myself. You can reach us on LinkedIn. You can reach us at Mood. But don't hesitate. We're here to help, and we love to talk about this stuff day in and day out. So again, here are your 7 sort of essentials. Each one has its own sub-chapters, plenty of detail. Use this as a guideline, use this as a framework or a checklist to make sure that you've thought through all of this, you've documented, you've involved the right people, you've hashed it out internally, and you should have a great experience with digital signage.
Great. Thank you, Morgan. Sorry, I was just pulling up the questions here. We do have a few coming in. And let me see if I can pose a few of these. Okay, we have one. Hello from the Philippines. Hello, Philippines. Thank you for joining us today. 2 questions. Let's see if I can translate this a little bit. We'd like to know if you have any available data for Asia. And I assume the question there is just state of the industry. How prevalent is digital signage in Asia right now, and what's the growth?
Yeah, I can take that one. Thank you, Sumter. And Morgan, please feel free to jump in here. But I really, in terms of the growth of digital signage that Morgan spoke about earlier, if we start in the east in Asia and move west, that's really been the flow of the growth of digital signage over the past 10, 15 years. So they've adopted digital far quicker than other parts of the world, and very successfully. So from an Asian perspective, I think we see that there's been mass adoption already, and other parts of the world are following that trend and picking it up.
Great, thanks, John. And the follow-up question to that was, if we have available data on the relation of digital signage to Asia, how does that relate to purchasing decisions of consumers? So I'm going to assume that that has to do with the influence of digital signage on buying behavior. Do we see a sales lift?
Well, I can't specifically speak to any data that we have, but I would believe it's very similar to what we have seen in Europe and in the US, as I mentioned. So, you know, sales uplift, certainly within the grocery sector, we're seeing 10% of digital versus print. And as I mentioned, in other sectors, including financial, you know, it can lead to maybe not direct sales immediately, but certainly more interest in products or solutions or services that lead eventually to future sales.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have another one coming in. looks like this is related to content management. Can you provide any guidance on staffing to manage content, i.e. who typically does it and how much time does it take? Good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. And again, it comes down to, the content that you're going to be broadcasting, how often it changes, how much are you going to be scheduling to play, and how many screens or visual zones are you managing across your network of locations. So some companies will have the resources in place and with the ease of use of CMS platforms and things like content templates, it can be quite easy to change content extremely quickly and on the fly. And that can be done in-house by a lot of companies. Other companies will choose to outsource that to their vendor. So it is definitely a very important consideration. Ultimately, the question comes down to how much content you're going to be scheduling, what resources you have internally, and what you may need to outsource. We generally find clients will either take it on themselves because their resources allow for that, or they will outsource it to a vendor to manage for them, or it may be a hybrid that at a corporate level, a client may choose to do some of the updating, but for the more labor-intensive localized content updates or content that changes very quickly, they may outsource it.
Yeah, John, I think that's a good point. A lot of when it comes to content management, who does it? How do you plan for that? I think that hybrid model that you touched on last is very popular right now. What we're seeing is enterprise clients that will rely on the vendor or the partner to manage the content that's sort of centrally coming out from headquarters, if you will, do the heavy lifting, and then either just have the ability to jump in there and do last minute changes as they see fit. But more commonly, what's very popular right now, the big trend is to give store managers the ability to go in there and localize the content. And that usually comes through some sort of templated form with limited capabilities, but it helps make that sign more relevant. It helps take actions faster. So we're seeing a lot of that where you have the vendor handling a lot of that overall corporate strategy communication, and then local users from the brand itself, store associates, store managers, if you will, influencing the content one way or the other at the point of sale.
Great, thanks guys. Another question, technical question. Is a media player required if we use smart TV screens? Is a media player required if we use smart TVs?
Yeah, I can take that one. So from a technical perspective, I think it'll come down to the content strategy, and I guess the answer is yes and no, or yes or no, right? If your content strategy allows for it, you may not need a media player if you're using a smart TV or smart screen. And what we've seen, and it's just not us, but just studies across the industry have shown that while they're getting better with every generation of screen, just like technology always does, today the media player that's built into these smart screen isn't quite as powerful as some of the external media players, as most of the external media players, to be honest. And so if your content strategy doesn't call for anything too fancy, if it's a static sign, if you think about maybe hours in an airport, things along those lines, you can absolutely rely on the player that's built into the screen, and you will not need an external player. However, if you're going to do things a little bit more sophisticated with more moving content, interactive maybe, at that point, you're still likely going to need an external player.
Okay. Great. Another one coming in, I'm assuming this might be coming from one of our marketing attendees. What analytics are available?
So I would
Morgan.
say,
sorry, I was going to say, Morgan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I will absolutely. So I would break it down into maybe 3 different categories. So from a marketing perspective, the first one would be what we would refer to as proof of play. So if you are building a campaign, you want to promote a product, or even just educate and inform, you're going to have a content campaign for that. You're going to play it you're going to want to be able to take data from those plays in the field and compare them with maybe your POS returns, right? Or with your education level if you're doing polls outside of your stores. So that proof of play data is what tells you what was played when. Sort of think of it as the play-by-play of every single player out in the field in your stores or in your businesses. And that's the I would say the 101 of data that you're going to gather from your digital signage solution. The next one is engagement, and that can come traditionally, it'll come through touchscreens. If you have a touchscreen application and you're expecting your customers to engage with the screen, you should be able to make sure your vendor allows you to basically capture that engagement sessions on a website, if you will, very similar to how that works in the web, and pull that information back centrally, consolidate that, and tell you how people are engaging with your screen. So now it's not just about playing content and making sure that the content was played, it's about capturing how people's behavior with the content. How are they engaging? How often are they engaging? How long are they staying engaged? Where do they drop off? Do they complete the journey? If not, and it'll help you fine tune that experience version after version of your content to make it more solid. And then finally, if I'm stretching a little bit, another analytics that's useful, more on the technical side, less on the marketing side, I think, is just how is the fleet doing? Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? Is everyone on? Are all the players online? Are they playing the right content? Just being able to monitor that, and at an enterprise level, while not as marketing focused as the first two, it's really important to be able to make sure that you have a healthy fleet, that your devices are online and playing the right content.
Morgan, if I can add to that, just on the engagement piece, I think particularly during the pilot phase, if you're using interactive solutions, change the location of the screen around in the store, as that may produce different engagement results. So your real estate might be limiting you in where you can put an interactive touchscreen, but there's different sizes of interactive touchscreens you can use. But during the pilot phase, have a couple of A/B stores testing your screens, your touchscreens in different locations, and then really look at that data and see where on the customer journey within the store does that content have more impact and more engagement. And that will help you then, obviously, as you plan a wider scale rollout.
Great. Thanks, John. I'm going to squeeze in one follow-up to that topic real quick. So on the topic of analytics, is there functionality to be able to export performance, runtime hours, specific content displayed, and export into a CMS for the purposes of monthly reporting?
Yeah, and I can take that one. So that goes back to that third part of the analytics, the more technical side. Absolutely, and of course, it'll be different from one vendor to another. But you should be able to expect that, especially at the enterprise level, that you're going to get some sort of report, either daily, weekly, monthly, whatever that frequency is, to get the health report out of the system and then be able to import it wherever you need it to run your own reports, whether that be Excel or some other tool that you have.
Great. How about that for timing? We've got about 45 seconds left. Great job, guys. Thank you, John and Morgan. So that'll wrap us up for today. Before we go, I just wanted to point out a few resources that are available to you. We will be sending you a recording of this webinar, as mentioned. Over in your panel, we do have a couple downloads that are available to you. First is the ebook about the 7 essentials, so a lot more in depth in ebook form about this topic or for the webinar today. And also simple digital signage best practices. That's a hot piece of content for us that we see a lot of downloads of. So I encourage you to take advantage of those. Obviously, we are more than happy to provide a private demo and consultation. So feel free to reach out to Morgan, his contact information, the email address there. Encourage you to connect with him on LinkedIn, John as well. We'd be more than happy to arrange something for you. We have a lot of fun with these. We are planning future webinars, so keep an eye out for those. And lastly, would encourage you to visit our website at us.moodmedia.com. And for this particular audience, that landing page is Enterprise Digital Signage. So it should be pretty easy for you to find on our website. And with that, we will go ahead and close things out for today. Thank you so much again. Stay safe, stay well, and we look forward to hearing from you again soon. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
thank you, everybody. Thanks for your
Thank
time.
you.